Alright guys, in this video we're going to be talking about part 3 of the CAPM exam, which is project scope management. And what's going to happen in project scope management is we're essentially defining what is going to be our project. And there's multiple approaches to handling a project, and the two main ones that you need to know of are predictive and agile. And regardless of whatever approach you take, the three vertices of a triangle that we're going to care deeply about are going to be the time, the cost, and the scope. And the time, cost, and scope of whatever project we're doing is going to be encompassing the quality of our overall project. And so when we follow a predictive approach, what this means is we're going to set a scope. We're going to basically fix the scope. We're going to say, I want this bridge created. So that's very defined. And then we're going to let time and cost be the variables. So I don't care how long this is going to take, and I don't care how much money it's going to take, but I need to get this bridge done. So that would be an example of a predictive approach to this particular project. And it follows a classical triangle example, which is what I have on the bottom right here. And so in the classical triangle, you've got the scope at the top, and basically you can think of your triangle as kind of doing this thing where as your time and cost change and move, your quality is going to be affected by it as well. Now, when we follow an agile approach to our project, what this means is that we're going to fix the time and the cost, and we're going to let the scope be variable. And so what this basically does is it creates an inverted triangle where this thing basically flips up on its head, and now we're letting cost and time be fixed, and we're going to change the scope accordingly. And so an example of this is in software development, where people do these things called sprints. And in these sprints, that's where basically you've got a certain amount of time, and you've got these stories that you're working on, and within these stories you're doing as much as you can within fixed time and costs. And for your management, cost is basically the same as how much of your employees' time do you need to actually get this job done. So basically you're fixing those, and you're saying do as much as you can. So the scope is that variable part. So like if you're a great programmer and able to do everything, you're gonna have a pretty big scope. But if you're new to it or you're still learning, that scope's going to be shrinking the quality of your overall project because you're not able to deliver as much. Anyway, that's what an agile approach looks like, is that basically our cost and time are these fixed set points. And then just to reiterate, quality is the area of these triangles that we're talking about with the predictive and agile approaches to our scope management. And so there's typical confusion here and a possible test question for the CAPM, which is what's the difference between project charter and scope? And so when you think of the project charter, it's an official document that authorizes the work and the project manager. So this is something that upper management is going to be signing off on to kickstart the project. And quite often you're not even going to have a project manager when the charter exists, because the charter is a thing that's basically coming from E-staff saying we need to build this bridge, or we need to build this new server farm, whatever. So that's the charter. The charter is going to include a purpose for the work. How are you going to measure that's works? How are you going to measure the work's progress? What's going to be required? You're also going to be discussing what the risks and milestones, as well as the finances, stakeholders, and you're going to be naming who's the project manager and sponsor for this particular project. So that's the charter. It's an official document for these purposes. The other term here, which is easily potentially conflatable, is scope, and there's some key distinctions here, which is basically the scope is what happens after your project's been created, and it's defining what you will create. And so this is where we're going to say what are the deliverables in our process, and what is acceptance criteria. So what does good look like after I've done this particular project? So management will have already told you we want a server farm. And they said, we want 20 servers put up in this warehouse. And so your scope is going to be saying, how are we going to measure our progress here in terms of, once I've got to 20 servers, once I'm halfway done, is that considered good enough for us to check off a deliverable? And then, what does good look like at the end of the day for our management? So that's what we have there. And then in addition to that, it's very important to be cognizant of the validate scope process. And so during scope validation, this is when there's going to be an inspection happening. So if you just installed 20 servers, you're going to want to make sure that your customers slash management, which would be your stakeholders, are happy with the work that's been done. So it's inspection driven. You're going to have people actually looking at the work that you've been doing. And then this is something that you're going to be doing after you finish a phase or a project and or a major deliverable. So at the end of every project, you're going to have scope validation, but at the end of a phase or a major deliverable, you could have an additional scope validation. So like if you just reached a milestone in one of your projects and you wanted to make sure that staff was okay with how it was coming along, this is where you would do validate scope. So that's going to wrap things up for this lecture. Hope it helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you all for watching.